All
Hello,
right.
hello, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll get started here in just a moment. The webinar today is Innovate Talent Management and Improve Hiring Success with Job Benchmarking. And we're just going to let folks come on in and then we'll get started. So welcome. Thank you for joining us. All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll get started here in just a moment. All right, that moment is now. So, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Anisa Aven, and this is part of the Best Practices in HR series of webinars. The summit today is all about recruiting, hiring best practices, and using technology, which is what today's conversation is about. It's really about leveraging science and technology along with hiring best practices in order to innovate your talent management and improve hiring success and job benchmarking. So I am eager to get started. One little piece of housekeeping that I want you to know about is you're here spending your time with us. Help us make it real and important and relevant to you. So if you have a particular idea in mind or challenge that you're looking to overcome, or a question about how these best practices may relate to you and your organization specifically, don't hesitate to use this session as your personal coaching opportunity. So we look forward to hearing your feedback and to learning more about your organization. So let's move right along. So, Innovating Talent Management. My name is Anisa Aven, and I am the founder and CEO of Turnkey Coaching and Development Solutions. We are an enterprise learning and development solution provider. We have highly skilled trainers, coaches, and organizational development consultants in every major metropolitan area in the US and in key hubs globally. And our work includes everything from strategy work with executive teams all the way down to targeted employee development, competency development, and and frontline manager, mid-level manager development, etc. This last year, we've also added a few technology components to both our diversity, equity, and inclusion program, as well as our leadership development program. So if you like anything about what you hear, you'd like to learn more about how we might be able to support your talent development initiatives, do give me a call. So now I'm very pleased and excited to introduce you to my colleague, Rodger Blaker. Rodger and I have 15 years of peer to peer working together in this space. We first started working together way back in 2006. It feels like a lifetime ago, especially after this long year we've just endured. But I want to just give you a couple of highlights about Rodger. Rodger has 5,000 plus coaching hours and training hours under his belt. One of the most unique talents that Rodger brings to the table is his ability to ask a lot of curious questions and then assimilate that into this really customized, bespoke solution for his clients, which is why this conversation around talent hiring best practices and innovating talent management is so timely and why he knows so much about this topic. So there are other aspects that I'd love to have Rodger share about himself and what you're going to learn today.
Well, thank you, Anisa. Yeah, welcome everyone. I'm glad that you're on the call here. It really is an honor to be able to speak to things, and it's really easy for me to enjoy doing that, especially about something I have a lot of passion about. And this is definitely an example of something that really matters to me. A little more depth to my background. I'm a leadership executive coach. I'm educated in that area. I'm certified through the Coaching Federation. But before that, I was actually in the corporate environment. I started out actually as a software developer, and not too long after that, I was promoted into positions of leadership, and those kept growing and extending out. Eventually navigated into project management, and there I set for my PMP and qualified for those things. So my point about that is I have a lot of experience from my years in corporate with the challenges that what I want to speak to today. Because I experienced it myself personally, I was on two sides of this. Sometimes not being the right set for the skills that maybe I had, but then the hiring challenges around this. And that could have been a number of ways. As a project manager, there's a lot of dotted line responsibilities, and really coming to understand from just practical experience about the challenges around be able to find the right people to put on the bus, but also the right seats on the bus. And so that's what I'm going to speak to a lot about today. It is about the hiring process, but also succession planning plays in this also. So it's those skill sets necessary for a person to do either being promoted positions or actually changing positions within a company. And how do you deepen the qualification to make sure that you're finding the right match for the person? Some assumptions to make in many cases that people can be highly educated, be highly certified in whatever the things are, the fields are in. They could be motivated, they could be highly skilled, experienced, all those kinds of things. But that's just part of the process. It's not necessarily everything that's a fit. So what I want to do is I want to kind of step into the situation that some of the problems we have. And then the whole point is what can be done to maybe enhance this quality of performance, that we're not talking about necessarily bad employers or poor performance, although those show up, but are those people that really could be qualified? But maybe the biggest issue is about what the position is and what it calls for within a company, and maybe how you navigate that more cleanly. So starting with situations where I think people, especially in HR, happens every day this way. You have people that just quit, and a lot of times you don't get a lot of information why. They just go away. Another part is you have people that create tension on teams. That could happen for a number of reasons, but I want to speak more specifically that some of that can come around because of a person that's not challenged the way that the job calls for, because there's a mismatch in some of the skill sets or what's required or whatever. And sometimes when people get in those things, they maybe complain a lot. And we're not here to talk about or criticize people's actions, but let's face it, we all kind of encounter these situations ourselves. And so these things can occur, and it's not because we're talking about a bad person. We're talking about something that's other than that that's causing a problem. Then you have not the right skill sets, but for the position. And that's some of what I've already talked about. And then you have expectations that don't match the job. That could be the person in that position that their expectations are not being met, because it could be that job has not been really that clearly defined. And it could be that the KPIs for it, and I'll cover more of this in a minute, are not really stated clearly to where we're able to identify the right person for that job. So that's some of the things you run into. I want to go ahead and talk a little bit about job matching now, some of the challenges here, because what do you have? It could be a square peg trying to go into a round hole. So if they're not a match, you have stress that they don't meet the requirements of the position. You have conflict between them, the position needs, some of the things I've already stated. It creates conflict sometimes with coworkers because some of the other coworkers could get frustrated with somebody and vice versa. You have higher absentees because if people aren't motivated, those things can occur, and a higher rate of turnover. And I really want to stress here that let's assume we're usually talking about people that are motivated, qualified people. They're not necessarily those troublemakers, those gossipers, which we know are in the company. Let's just talk about there are people that some of these things may show up because of just not having the right motivated situation for the right job tied to the right person.
So Rodger, on that note, on the job matching, I want to also point out that these are leading indicators of when a person isn't a good fit, even after the hire.
Yes.
Later, you're going to talk a little bit about how to make sure they're a good fit pre-hire, and
Yeah.
how it
That's
is.
where
You're in
we're
these
going.
interviews. Exactly. You're in these interviews and you just are wowed by someone. You just know this person's going to be a great fit for our culture. And so oftentimes a hiring manager will just put them in that position. You're going to share with us how to prevent these indicators, which will
Hmm.
be a reason for a departure of someone that otherwise could have been a great hire if they were in the right position. Is that right?
Yeah, and that's a great point, Anisa, because that's something that I wasn't thinking about so much when I put this together, but you really had a key thing that I experienced, and I've had this stated many times to me, and I know people in HR have this happen. Certainly managers do. Um, we all have biases. We're never going to get rid of them. And what we're looking for is some tools that maybe help us counter our biases to give us a clearer definition that takes that emotional part out of it. Because oftentimes what happens, you have a manager, they identify with people that have things that match their styles, what they're just, and we'll cover some of the different types of assessment sciences, and they'll hire because that they like that. As opposed to somebody, maybe they're interviewing them process and there's a little bit of an edginess feeling and everything. It may be that all's going on there is because that person, their behavioral styles, their things like that don't align. And that leader is not very comfortable with that, as opposed to having a tool to look at and say, wait a minute, does the alignment for the requirements job match this benchmark we've done? If it does, I need to set that what's going on with me aside maybe and examine this a little more deeply. So great point, Nisa. Does that make sense to you?
It does.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So now then, let's go into this whole thing about the cost of turnover, just to kind of state things that I think anybody that's been in positions as a leader in a company or in HR understand these things. So you have direct cost of training benefits to payroll. There's things there that happen because turnover is very, very costly. And there's been numbers run on it to where I think sometimes, especially depending if there's a more in-depth skill sets and training required, it could be couple of years worth of salary that costs the company just in turnover. Then you have stress and support departments. And I'm thinking about some of them like your HR, your training teams, their peers, the support departments, those kinds of stresses can happen from that turnover. Or before the turnover, just because a position is not a right fit for somebody, they're not really aligning up and meeting the expectations. Then you have low morale from the current team that's struggling with somebody because there's a lack of a fit there. You have stress of supervisors' time. Then stress on the interview process team. The more turnover you do, and the more disruption, there's more people have got to do part of the interviewing process. And there's other costs here, and I think these are key. Now, these can be different reasons why, but then you have this disengagement non-performers. So briefly, you may have non-performers that really are not motivated to do the job. You're going to have those probably regardless, but many times that non-performer, again, is not necessarily a fault of theirs or even the hiring organization. It just was not a good fit. And therefore, this person becomes more disengaged and is not performing at a level because they simply are not matching the requirements of that position. And it may be they're completely talented to do it. They may be smart enough. They may even have certifications that align to it. But if that job is not really clearly defined, there could be some key pieces, and that's what we're going to talk about here soon, are the assessment tools that may help eliminate some of those guesses or those things, those blind spots that you aren't able to see.
Well, this brings up a good point that Wendy just shared. And she said, the risk to the employer brand. And I think that those of us who are in this hiring manager position, right? I think that that's probably something that we're going to eventually be able to put a real number on. The more we begin to compete for the smaller market of folks in qualified candidates in the market, the more important our employer brand is. And if there is, let's just look and see how fast Glassdoor has grown with with every time someone wants to consider a new job or a new company, the first place they go is to look and see, well, what do the other
Right.
employees say about them? So employer brand is a
Yeah.
really big deal. And what I'm hearing you say is the turnover hard cost is just one thing. There is a much bigger piece when you look at the intangibles, the disengagement, non-performers, stress, toxic work environment, and employer brand.
Right. That's perfect. Exactly. Because we're talking about many layers here. And I've had experience, and also being in the coaching industry like we have been, how many times we've run a situation where you really analyze it coming from the outside, and you look at the people and you're like, these people are smart, they're qualified, they're, we're not looking at it that there's a lot of negativity. There could be negativity on, but we can start peeling layers back and identifying these are good people. There's something else going on here. So it's more than just what we're talking about here, but this is a key piece of how you make sure when you're doing your upfront thing of hiring, are we making sure that we're really aligning people to what we're needing for that job? It's been clearly defined, and then we have a way to benchmark to make sure we're matching those candidates. Now, a couple of things came out of this too, Anisa, is I want to hit this next thing here. Something like an estimated, I think that's a low number now, 11 billion lost to employee and disengaged in non-performance and turnover each year. I think it's a lot higher than that because I think this number has been extracted a while back. And research is also showing that non-performance can bring down a productivity of a company by 30%. And I think my experience is a lot of people just deal with that.
Yeah.
And my point is that we're not here with the keys to the kingdom about how to stop all that. When I'm thinking about this and us working on this for some years, I look at the fact if a company can just make a 5% increase in that, or 7%, certainly a 10%. I mean, that's a grand slam.
A grand slam is right.
Yeah, because I mean, it starts adding up in a hurry when you think about loss of cost again of the training, of hiring, going through all that process. It doesn't take very much percentage to be a major shift.
Yeah, that the cost has been of losing an employee after a hire is it is at least 1.5 times their salary up to 2 times their salary.
Exactly.
If you think about it in terms of for every $60,000 in salary, you are looking at least 1.5 times that. So 90,000 in cost. Now you got to start all over again. So in my mind, what you're going to share with us as far as the technology is concerned is if you can save one new hire and support them in being a high performer, make sure they're a good fit and retain them, then you've just saved the company around 90,000 for every 60,000 worth of salary.
Exactly. And that's real cost and also just lost time cost.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And so I think now what we're going to step into is where I'm going to go through the process that we've exercised here as far as one of the ways to actually create the benchmark, this process. So I'm going to peel back a little bit down in the weeds a little and kind of go through this process. And I want to set the stage for this up front, that one of the things that really matters about doing this is a company has to be absolutely solidly committed to doing this process, because it is going to be upfront heavy lifting work to be able to get a benchmark created. So I'm going to go through some steps that we identify in the way that we've done it, knowing that a company has to have, the leadership's got to be all in on trying this, at least if nothing else, at least giving a pilot on this, but they really have the commitment in place, that the proper level of leader that's stating this, that makes sure that the people that are maybe doing this work are actually going to be fully engaged on this game, because it is that serious. Now, the way we do it is we have a facilitation process. So, and one of the things I was thinking about, Anisa, that I think one of the real values of having someone outside, someone that doesn't even know this position, doesn't even maybe that familiar with the company, besides just talking and meeting and get some general ideas, because they're coming in with a complete blank slate. And their job is not to figure all out. Their job is to facilitate the team that's inside the organization to do this. So I'm going to start with the process about that. So example would be you have facilitation and you want to identify the job. I think some of the big...
Ask you a quick question. So And I'd love to hear from folks on the call. What do you believe job benchmarking is? What is it? Does your company do it? Right. So
Mhm.
help me understand. Job benchmarking is simply identifying not just the description of the job, not just the job titles or the quote unquote responsibilities. How is it different than a job description when you benchmark a job?
That's a great point, because that's one of the things that you're ahead of me on this.
Okay. All
And
right.
the reason why, because that's a great question, because here's something I've identified and I think is very true many times. I don't think a lot of times there's been a thorough driving out of the requirements and the KPIs for a position. So starting right with it, and I'm not, and the skill set it takes to do it, or the time it takes to really sit down and investigate it. That's the reason why I think even if you aren't going to do a benchmark, if you did something like this exercise and really made sure that you really qualified the KPIs, and that for when you go out and post a job placement, that can maybe even be clear about what's required there. So I'm going to step even further into that. Another area that I really see a lot of weakness, and again, this is not criticizing people because I think this is very challenging for a lot of us to do, is when we have those KPIs, we have that job set that way, then we look at the performance of the people. And when you have somebody that's not aligning that performance, you're quick to identify that and see if there's something you can do to coach that person along or whatever. And especially have corrective action to take. And I think this is really a weak point in many areas because it takes time, it takes HR's involvement. How do you have something where you're really stating it clearly about what the expectations are, and all somebody's not meeting that performance, the action you take at the right levels, the right time to see if you can help that person make that shift to it, or if they're not, that you don't wait all that long to replace them. It could be moving to another position in the job, but also terminating them, because I think one time we're really short on doing that because of all kinds of reasons that I think start with this. If you're not really clear, you hadn't got that clearly defined and what actions that leader will take to be able to do it the right way, you end up carrying people that are non-performers and things like that. And so that's a leadership challenge. Does that make sense?
It does.
So that kind of sets the stage for what we're talking about here. So subject matter experts. So one of the things that we do here is we want to collect people that are the high performers in this position, a few of those to bring in as far as this process that's going to be facilitated, probably somebody from HR, the manager of that group probably, and there could be some people that are closely tied responsibilities to that job, but you want to have a good set of people. They could be 6 or 8, 10 people that are going to be the people contributing to it to help to create this benchmark that the facilitator is going to draw out the information. So the clear understanding of the job, why the job exists, and that's what the facilitation is about. Without getting too deep into it, one of the things that we've identified that when you come out of this, you should have no more than a max of 5 KPIs, period. If this job ends up because of other experts and they start coming up with 6 or 7, it's probably a job responsibility that's too much for one person to handle. That's kind of a bar set from the experience of this. And that's another thing this will help will do. Is this leadership's position or whatever, or the individual, is it really more work than really that one person can handle? And if you drive that out, now you got information there about, okay, what do we need to do about this position to make sure that we aren't overloading it and having more expectations that are reasonable for anybody to meet. That's one of the benefits that can come out of this. Then you have to let the job talk and define the key accountabilities, KPIs, and what I mean by the job talk, that collecting that data from the people that are being facilitated and capturing it. And there's a process I'm going to get into now about how you arrange it and how you put things together to where you come out with those stated requirements for the job that can be documented now out of this process. And then we have each one of those people that participated in that driving out those KPIs to respond individually to assessments. And there's layers of them. We have 4 max, but you can do less. That can just vary on the position. I don't want to get in all that right now, but the more you have, the more in depth of the quality of that challenging benchmarking is going to be. Then you have them, and then we combine them. While we do this, we take all those individuals and we create an aggregate that ends up creating the benchmark. So that's kind of the scientific process without going into a lot of detail about exactly how that works. but you come out, and I'll speak a little bit more about the different sciences we're going to cover here, and cover a little bit of this here in a second. Then you implement the job benchmark. One of the cool things about this is once you have this benchmark document data there, there's also a way that you can create reports out of it that actually provide questions that an interviewer can use as some keys that might help them even deepen the questions they ask a person during the interview process. That's one of the cool things about the reports that are generated out of this.
Well, and that brings me to something you said a little earlier that I think is important, and that is part of this process is essential, is eliminating that affinity bias, right? That subjective opinion. Oh my gosh, you like horse racing too? I'm hiring you. You know, it happens every day. And what you just said is one of the things that a good job bench with a corresponding report can do is provide the hiring manager and those other managers who aren't experts in interviewing how to ask the right questions that match the job, not just about tell me about yourself or tell me about a recent success or something that you've practiced and rehearsed 1,000 times prior to coming in here. So I know you're going to sound really great. These are questions that correlate to the KPIs, to the requirements. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, exactly. One of the ways that I think really I've seen the most efficient way to do this is that HR goes to a placement service or whatever, and maybe they clicked, they may have 50 resumes, but they go through and they pick a dozen that they go through and qualify for expertise, education, background, and whatever screening they may do. They pass those on to the hiring manager. And it could be more than one person looks at them, but they go through, and it could be some of these people that did this benchmark process, and they review them and they come up and they say, okay, we want to interview these, we want to check these 5 out. And one way to really optimize this, there may be just a phone interview. You schedule a thing with them just to kind of get a general feel and background of that. They end up picking out of that dozen. You pick the 5 you want to interview, and you actually do that just a phone interview. You hadn't even brought them in yet. At that time, then you may have them do this benchmark or respond to this instrument. And now you've got more information. And that's what I mean. Once you do that, it's going to then spit out a lot of these questions you can use during the interview process face-to-face, that you can use that material. So that's one way to really kind of have it in a step logically that really provides you the process to that. Okay, where in other words, where do we have the assessment done? Where in that whole process of hiring is the right fit to that assessment to optimize it?
So just tell me to hush if I'm asking too many questions,
No,
Rodger, but now you've brought up another point. There's 2 things happening that are disrupting how hiring managers, the process that many companies have used are now being turned on, upside down. Good news, application tracking systems match a resume to the job so that you're easily able to filter out, oh, we just got 1,000 applications. Here are the top 20 that actually passed at 85% or above the ATS, but that's still 20 candidates. What I'm hearing you say is now you can take those 20 candidates and do one of 2 things. Either one, have a quick call, tell me about yourself. I want to hear if you're a good fit, yes or no. And they can take their own personal assessment against this benchmark, and you get another number. And that number says this person is 60% likely to be successful in this job. This person has the affinity, the skill set, the personality, the competencies, because it does match competencies also. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm going to cover those here in a minute.
All right. So I'm not going to ask any more on that.
No, you're doing good. Go ahead.
So if you have too many candidates and you're spending too many times trying to go, yes, no, and you're not going to get right because you've got 20 open positions you've got to do this on, this process will eliminate the guesswork so that by the time you've called in 5 candidates, you're looking at all 5 of these have an 85% or above from the application tracking system. They also have 85% or above on their likelihood of being successful in this role. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's perfectly said. And like I said, I'm going to cover the 4 sciences in a general way here in a minute. And just what you said, I mean, you can imagine the especially you're looking here where you've had these experts, the people that really perform high in this job. And when you're doing that, there's no bias in that. These people are the highest performers. They're the biggest producers, whatever that is they're bringing here. And in the end, it's not anything to do with the personality. It's to do with what their expertise are and how people clearly identify that. And then you take it and you capture those KPIs again. The facilitator making sure that they're really putting in words the brief statement each one of those up to 5 would have. That's really clear that everybody says, yeah, man, this is, and because I think a lot of times people go out and try to create the job skill sets to go in and put it into the advertisement or wherever they're going out to do the recruiting. And they've maybe done that on their own. And when you have as you know, when you have a team of people come together, you can draw, it could be 5 brains in a room. It's 20 times the power because of those 5 brains coming together and actually clarifying the expectations of this job in a clear, definitive statement.
Great.
So absolutely. Okay. So now what we're going to go into, we are going to step into the 4 sciences that we cover here. And I'm going to do this in general terms to explain each piece of it and break it down a little bit as we go through this. So you have the competencies, which Anisa, you just talked about. You can have like 35 skills competencies to do with leaderships, communication, writing. There's several of them there. And so if you have out of your benchmarking, out of those SMEs, once they've done their assessments individually and you create that aggregate, then what you're looking for is maybe the top 7 skill sets that you want to match out of that 35 to the person that's going to be taking the assessment to compare those two, to see how many of those top 7 align to what competence this person has. See how that aligns?
I do. Like
then you have behaviors. This is the kind of things how the person does the job. It's how I do it. It's how I prefer to work. It's whether I like to do things fast and quick and have a quick turnaround, quick change. I'm really comfortable. I'm energized by change. Then you have certain people, that's like a kiss of death. Change they're not comfortable with. And what you're looking for is those behaviorals of how they do the job that align to what this job requires. And there's a hierarchy of 12 in those. And what you're looking for is the top 4. How many of the top 4 of this person doing the benchmark align to the top 4 that's out of the benchmark compared to the person taking the assessment? Then you have motivators or your driving forces. That's the culture of the job, and that's the why. Why do I get out of bed in the morning to go to work? What energizes me to do whatever it is I do? The thing about the behaviors and motivators, you're going to do those whether this is a good job fit or not. I mean, that's the reality, because that's how you function. And you can see if I'm doing them and they're not aligned to this job, then I'm trying to do them. You can just see the stress that's putting on that employee and that department and their peers for this person that's struggling with this. And again, there's 12 type motivators defined, and you're looking for the top 4. And there's a midpoint, the ones that the mid 4 you'll use to maybe embrace into the top 4. But again, you're looking for how those top 4 align to this person's assessment. The one that's a little more complex, but I'm not going to cover it a lot right now, is the Acumen Indicator. This is much more of a mathematical science-based assessment. And it really has a much deeper dive into this person's ability to judgment, their impact on their interaction with the external world, and their self-perception and discernment that directly relates to performance. And that one has six categories and two sides, the external and the internal. And it measures against the overall acronym, but also just that person's ability to manage that. It gives you scale numbers. And it really, it's effective for anybody, but where this is you want to definitely use this one when you're working with senior level leadership positions, whatever, this one here, because this is going to tie somewhat to EQ. And therefore it really does show some things up that might, again, there could be coaching questions or interview questions. It doesn't disqualify anybody necessarily, but it gives you some insight about some questions you want to ask that might help inform you about what you saw in that assessment. Something that's very key about all of this. The ones I'm talking about here are completely bias-free assessments that have been certified through to meet the EEOC requirements and the OFCCP. Therefore, there's not any problems, litigation problems if somebody feels like there's a bias going on here, because that's been legally tried, and it doesn't float when somebody tries to use the argument against those.
I want to point out that probably our HR friends on the call know about this, but that's a really important point. Many companies are still trying to use DISC or MBTI and some of these other personality assessments as hiring tools, and they can find themselves in EEOC non-compliance and trouble for that. So what you just said is really important.
Yeah, because if you step back and think about this, because the assessments here and the organizations that I'm connected with that use this have gone through the next, that's been tried by some people to do it, and they've not passed the sniff test if there's any kind of bias or whatever. And you think about it, you're doing a blind thing of creating the benchmark, which is not tied to any people, any culture, or anything like that. It's the job requirements. And then you take this and you align it to that job. And I mean, you could do this thing to where, say, you eliminate anything about even talking about it. You don't know anything about their history, their background. You don't know the culture. You don't know lighter skin, darker skin. You don't know anything. And if you took this and lined up there, it's completely blind if you look at it purely at that form.
Yeah,
because it's going completely at the qualified of this position.
It's worth stating that many HR organizations inside companies have set a strategic priority of eliminating biases in the hiring process and cultivating a greater commitment to their diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. And one of the key ways to do that is through blind resume audits, eliminating first name, last name,
Yep.
And a hiring assessment, because then it's all about fit and it completely eliminates all the biases.
Exactly. And this would line that perfectly. I mean, you wouldn't even have to do any interviews. You just take the resume and say, okay, let's just pick the dozen we want. Let's have them do this assessment and see how
That's
they
right.
line to the job. And you don't know anything about it. You don't know male, female. You don't know anything.
That's right.
Transgender, you don't know anything.
That's right.
Because in the end, that doesn't matter. That's not the key piece here. So absolutely. Okay. Let me see if I can make this thing move again. What I want to do is I want to touch on a few of them here that anonymity is the case, but there's a few examples here of people that actually implement this process. So you have a company.
I love this part. Thank you.
Yeah, was losing 50% of new hires during the training program. So they benchmark and get the job requirements again, something I've stated very clearly that they got clear on the job requirements. And they identified and brought in the right people as a result of that better, and then they increased their retention by 80%. You have an organization that had 74% turnover in Salesforce, and these are the sales and the call centers are really high turnover areas. So like I said earlier, if you could just reduce some percentage of this, the stress on the organization would probably dramatically increase. But they benchmarked and they did the debrief with those people that through the assessment process to create the benchmark, and they did all that debrief to make sure they really were clear that what they came out with is the right fit from what they did when they did the original facilitation process. And they had 0 team turnover in the subsequent 18 months as a result of that. Now, I'm setting real high ones here, but let's just face it. If we had this here and I had a 30% increase, any number there from what that was would be dramatic improvement. Mortgage company experienced over 300% turnover annually in sales department. There's another one of your high volume turnover things. Using the 5 sales expertise, where I'm talking about, you have your experts, your top salespeople, what it is they do and how they do it and everything, and you capture that through facilitation and you use those 4 assessment sciences to come out with that. And as a result of that, the turnover reduced 250% in 6 months.
That's great.
And then the service organization losing 60% of all the new hires during the first 60 days of the job. Using benchmark tools, change the hiring process, whichever one of these things we're actually talking about. And after implementation, no turnover for 60 days. There's some examples that's the kind of the results that can happen if this thing is really, like I said, the commitment in the organization at the right level really takes the time to put this in place. And one of the things that, go ahead, Anisa.
I was just going to say a couple of things. The process you're talking about combines science-backed assessment plus a very specific high performer input, those subject matter experts, plus the KPIs. So it's a process that initially you do on an important role that then from there until that role change, that benchmark is solid for how long?
Well, that's a great point, because I think going through, and maybe it doesn't really necessarily have to bring in an outside person to help facilitate it, but the part of the team is still around, say a year or two later, going back and reviewing that and say, these up to 5 KPIs, these job requirements, are they still worded right? And do they line right? What's changed in our industry? What's changed the responsibility of this job? And especially if all of a sudden there is a organizational change or there's a merger of a company, well, common sense tells you it's time to do it again. Because the requirements based on, it could look on the external thing like these two companies do the same thing, but inside that company, what's required to do that job could be dramatically different. Yeah. And so, being aware and staying tuned. And it's like anything about writing up the details of something. And you and I know this because some of the companies that we've done another type of business development thing on is they hadn't taken time to document requirements and things like that. And now they've grown, they've gotten very large and they don't have that stuff. It's all in people's heads. And you and I've seen the train wreck that creates.
That's right.
So it does take that discipline commitment about, okay, what do I need to do to make sure that we're keeping this job viable and energized right by that assessment? Because if it starts going off track, now we're actually hiring people again. We're now doing what we did this for to stop.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
Okay. So imagine, what would you do with your time if you reduce the time spent interviewing, rearranging jobs and territories, reduce training hours, and soothe frustration of current teams? I mean, just imagine if you just had some of that. I know people in HR love doing what they do, but I have to believe there are times when it's like, oh my God, can I just stop some of the noise?
Yeah. Yeah.
Then how would a company grow and advance? Find exact matches faster? And I say exact, I want to use that term loosely because, again, I gave you definitions of 5 competencies, of 4 behavioral styles, 4 motivators, and then you have those 6 categories of the 4th instrument there. And exact is not worried about that. Matter of fact, I get calls back when somebody does see times they want to kind of talk about it a little bit because there's scales. There's exact matches, there are close matches, a little more match, and there's unmatched. And so they want to talk sometimes because I've got quite a few of these are exact matches, but there are, there's a number of them that are somewhat. We look at that separation in the graph to see how much and determine, okay, this is still a good match, because that's the second criteria, exact and then good. So it sometimes it's worth checking that out. So when I say exact, I just say it's exact for what I'm looking for at this time because it's a whole lot closer than what it used to be.
Yeah. I want to ask a question about some of that. Help me illustrate the process, right, with those high performers, those subject matter experts. You're bringing those in, and they're having a conversation, right? They take an assessment that helps them identify, this. Let's just take something easy. In fact, I'm thinking of a client who did the job benchmarking process. DMS, you may remember.
Yeah, matter of fact, they still do assessments today.
Okay, and that was years ago.
Yeah,
so,
I think 7 or 8 or something.
Yeah,
like that.
wow, that's fantastic. Great to hear. So here's one of the things that I recall about this particular situation. So the CEO had really a lot of challenge with hiring someone to be basically his right hand guy or gal, right?
Right.
Someone that could duplicate his level of strategic thinking, critical thinking, moving on their feet, see around the corner, what's going to come at us, and manage multiple projects. And what I remember is that initially he ignored the science, right? There was someone that wasn't a good fit. And they went through the job benchmarking process, but he really thought, I know who's going to be a better fit. I'm going to hire this person for this role. I don't care that she scored a 68. I think she's the right one. It ended up being within, I want to say 4 or 5 months.
Hardly any time at all.
Yeah, hardly any time at all. And he was so disappointed because he just knew. So after that, he's had that same experience looking at the data and going, but I really want this person, right? Only to go, nope, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm going to trust the science. And it's not that the science says who you need to hire. It's more of does your opinion of this person's competency map with what the science says is their level of competency, the things that they enjoy, what they're passionate about, their strengths, weaknesses, etc. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but that's my cat knocking on the door. Pardon me. Yeah. She's quite insistent. So I just had to open the door there.
I thought somebody was typing.
That was my cat. Yeah, that's a little embarrassing. So what I was going to say about that, and then we'll wrap up here in just a moment, is that after that experience, he began to really listen to the science. He coupled his gut and what he wanted and what he thought was true with the science, but the two together. Sometimes he doesn't hire the one that scores a 90% if it doesn't match his gut. Sometimes if his gut says, this 85% is good enough, because I think we're going to be a good culture fit. And that works out. It's when he ignored the science that he regretted it and said, that was a waste of time. I just wasted a ton of time training, hiring.
It was a painful experience. That's right. That was painful learning. And the thing about it is, when we talk about bias doesn't mean anything negative. It can. I mean, we all know that. We all witness that in our society today. But a lot of times it's biased because, like you said, I really felt good about this person. Yeah. There was something about it. I really, really felt a connection there. And then when I was asking about the job, it just seemed like there was things they were saying. And that's what happened. And the science of the assessment, and they use 3 of these. They don't use the Acumen Indicator. And it's because it's a position that those are enough, that those align well enough. And just to give you proof in the pudding, they're still using it today. I've already done a few this year. And matter of fact, I ended up talking to a manager of the department, because she wanted to ask me about one they just did. We got on a phone call and briefly kind of went through it. And I think it was just kind of helping her reminder when she's looking at it, don't get tied up too much if everything's not green. Yeah. Because it does color codes of 4 colors about the exact, let's say I said good, fair, and poor. And there was no poor on this. So give her a chance to kind of unpack some of it, kind of remind herself again. And it's like, okay, they qualified her for what she wanted to ask and get the information. So
Love it. So I'd love to hear from you guys. What's your takeaway from today? And Rodger, what would next steps be if someone wanted to just have a consultation with you about, how can I use this in our hiring? Is it going to be a good fit for all companies? What are the costs of this? I know you don't want to answer all of that right now because we're out of time, but how can someone get a hold of you? And then kind of recap, if you would, whether someone works with you in this process or not, there's key takeaways that people can take and use in their own hiring practices.
Well, if you just want to do something like I say, I don't feel like we're as disciplined as we could be as far as really making sure that we get the job requirements defined well. I mean, one thing they could do on their own here is somebody in HR that really is a good communicator and maybe facilitate. You got a manager there, is aligned with that manager. The manager brings in 3 or 4 of the people, they're high performers themselves and things like that. And maybe there's a person in a different department that's really closely connected. Therefore, they're very aware of what satisfies that other department's need from this area, and bring them in and let the HR person interview them to help them drive out the KPIs to make sure, are they clear? Are they really defined the way? Because if you did nothing else than that, you'd find out, well, yeah, we are aligned, but maybe we're not. But also it helps all those people there understand very, very clearly, and you want to make very brief statements around those individual requirements. And again, if you end up having, we're going through this and we've worked and we've got 7 things here. The question is that too much for one position to handle? So you can do that on your own just by having that knowledge to take away. Now, as far as with us and everything, Anisa, what I did is I put your information in here, because I would suggest if people are interested in finding out more about this, is to contact Turnkey and make that call there. And if they just want more information about it, like the cost, or maybe even provide them sample reports of what that benchmark looks like. There's actually a 1-page document that kind of does a schematic of the steps through it. There's things like that we'd be happy to provide people.
That's great. That's great. So yes, absolutely. You can email me, Anisa@turnkeycoachingsolutions.com. I'll put you in touch with Rodger. I would love to hear about what you've got going on related to hiring and some of those challenges. If you and your organization are also looking at your hiring practices specifically related to your mission or guiding principles related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, this process could change the game and makes things a lot more aligned and compliant with your real intentions. So I look forward to hearing your feedback. I look forward to having a deeper dialogue about this. Rodger, this has been enlightening again. It's been a while since we've talked about this, and every time I'm just amazed by the potential of this process.
Oh, I appreciate it, Anisa. I think so too. I think it's one of those things we teamed up well on. So absolutely.
I agree. All right. Thank you, Rodger. Thank you, Wendy, for being here. Everyone, we appreciate you, and have a great day. Give us a call.